Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about a couple of different types of methods that a class can have. We'll talk about accessor methods, otherwise known as getters, designed to get private data from outside of a class, as well as mutator methods, otherwise known as setters, designed to actually change the state or data of a class. We'll add some members and methods to our character class so it's not so empty. Let's dive in. As their name suggests, accessor methods are designed to access data. Now, in general, the data stored in our member variables should be private. So what if we need to access that data? That's where getters come in. They provide access to the data, preventing us from being able to change it. Now, we can define a function right here in the class. This function called getDamage simply returns the value of the private damage variable. We call this an accessor method, or simply a getter for damage. This allows us to access damage, but prevents us from being able to change damage, so the data remains unchanged. Now notice the syntax here. There is no semicolon at the end of the body of our getDamage function. Compare this to the semicolon that we do have to have at the end of our class body. Now, mutator methods allow us to actually change variables. The advantage of having a function to change a class's members allows us to enforce rules dictating the way we change the state of the class. Now, here's a setter, also known as a mutator method, for the damage variable. Notice that we're enforcing a rule here when it comes to changing damage. We only change damage if amount is greater than 0. Thus, we can't assign a value to the damage variable that wouldn't make sense in our game or program. Now, in order to have getters and setters on our character class, we're going to need some member variables. So let's add some. Here's our character class. Now let's think about which variables we need on the character class. If we scroll down, we'll see that our knight has a texture 2D for its sprite sheet. And we also have texture 2Ds for the idle and run sheets, which we use depending on the character's movement. So why don't we add some texture 2Ds to our character class? We'll add these to the private section as data should generally be private. So we're going to add a texture 2D, and we'll call this simply texture for the texture that the character is using. But we'll also need texture 2Ds for when the character is idling and running. So we're going to add a texture 2D called idle and a texture 2D called run. Now, scrolling back down, we'll see that we also created a vector 2 called knight pose, and this is the position on the screen that we're going to draw the character. So since this is the character's screen position, I'm going to add a vector 2 to the character class, but I'm going to call this screen pose. So we'll say vector 2 screen pose. So we'll know where to draw the character. Let's scroll back down and we'll see that we have some animation variables. I'll go ahead and highlight all of these and copy them. And up here in the character's private section, I'm just going to paste them in. So we have right, left, running time, frame, max frames, and updated time. Now notice that we're using braced initialization for some of these. We can initialize variables as we declare them in a class like this. Now the screen position is simply going to be the center of the screen where we draw the character. But the character is going to be moving around in the world, so we'll also need a world position. Let's add that just under screen pose. It'll be a vector 2, and we'll call it world pose. Now, when we finally create a variable of the character type, we're going to need to access the world pose variable so we know where to draw the map. Now, since world pose is a private variable, this means we'll need a getter for this. So your challenge is to create a getter for world pose. This function will return a value of type vector2, and it won't have any input parameters. Pause the video and create this getter now. Okay, so here in the public section, we're going to create a getter for world pose. So this will return vector2, and we'll call this get world pose. Now it has no inputs, and all it does is return world pose. Now, if you have a small function that consists of a single statement, we can write this in a more compact form. It looks like this. Return world pause. So the function body and the statement are all on the same line like this. Now, you might be tempted to place a semicolon at the end, but don't do that. Remember, a function definition does not require a semicolon at the end like the class definition does. It's the statement inside of the body that requires a semicolon. Great job! So in summary, we learned about accessor and mutator methods, also known as getters and setters. We added members to the character class, and we also added a getter method to the character for world pause. The character class is starting to come together. We're almost ready to start using it. I'll see you in the next video.